Stand still. I want to see how someone like you looks in real crystal. Preston Hargrove lifted the goblet over the older man's head, and his grin stretched wide as the red wine crashed down, streaming across a weathered face, soaking into a simple black suit, dripping onto marble floors that cost more than most people earned in a year. Victoria Hargrove clapped from across the room as though her son had performed a magic trick. Richard Hargrove leaned toward his circle of friends with a cold smile and murmured, "Try not to stain the carpet. These galas were not designed for your kind." The man did not flinch. He did not wipe his face. He stood perfectly still, wine running down his jaw, and none of them understood that they had just drenched the one person capable of collapsing their empire with a single decision. His name was Keanu Reeves. He was 60 years old, and almost nobody in that ballroom remembered what that name used to mean. The crystal chandeliers above the Hargrove Foundation Grand Ballroom cast a warm amber glow across 600 guests in designer evening wear. The room smelled of lilies and expensive cologne and the particular brand of arrogance that came from generational wealth so deep it had lost all memory of where it started. Waiters in white gloves circulated with champagne on silver trays. A string quartet played something classical and forgettable in the far corner. Everything was curated to project a single message. This is where power lives. You are lucky to be here. Keanu had arrived alone. No assistant. No security. No entourage. He had driven himself in a 12-year-old motorcycle that he parked between a Bentley and a Rolls-Royce in the underground garage, drawing a look of undisguised contempt from the valet, who was not sure whether to offer him a ticket or direct him to the service entrance. He wore a black suit, not custom-tailored, not designer. A simple black suit he had owned for years, the kind that came off a department store rack and fit well enough if he did not care about impressing anyone. His white shirt was pressed but not starched. He wore no tie. His black boots were clean but visibly worn at the heels, the leather softened by years of use. His dark hair, streaked heavily with silver and gray, fell to his shoulders. He had not shaved in 3 days, and the stubble along his jaw gave his lean face a roughened look that suggested a man more comfortable in a workshop than a ballroom. 20 years ago, he had been one of the most recognizable faces on Earth. Action films that earned billions. Magazine covers in every language. A name that opened every door in every city on every continent. That life felt like it belonged to a different person now. A younger man who had not yet learned what loss truly meant. He had learned. Her name was Jennifer. They were never married, but she was the person he would have built a life around if the world had allowed it. She was pregnant with their daughter when the baby came too early, born still, a silence in the hospital room that no amount of fame or wealth could fill. They named her Ava. They buried her in a Los Angeles cemetery on a Thursday afternoon while the California sun shone with an indifference that made him want to tear the sky apart. Jennifer never recovered. The grief reshaped her from the inside, the way water reshapes stone, slowly and irrevocably. 18 months after Ava, Jennifer was killed in a car accident. Single vehicle. The police listed it as accidental. Keanu listed it as the second time the universe had taken everything and left him standing in an empty room with nothing but the sound of his own breathing. He did not fall apart the way the tabloids predicted. He did not spiral into addiction or rage or public breakdown. He simply grew quieter. He pulled his life inward until it occupied the smallest possible space. He stopped making films. He stopped returning calls. He sold a house in the hills and gave away most of what he owned. And then he built something. The Stillwater Foundation started in a rented office above a laundromat in Portland, Oregon. Its mission was simple: help people who had been broken by circumstances beyond their control find a way back to solid ground. Veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder who could not sleep without seeing the faces of people they had killed. Children who had lost every parent they had ever known. Women rebuilding their lives after years of abuse. Keanu funded it with his own money. He did not put his name on the building. He did not hold press conferences or produce glossy annual reports. He simply showed up. He sat with veterans in group sessions and said nothing because sometimes the most important thing another human being could do was be present without requiring anything in return. He visited children's homes and helped with homework. He learned the names of every staff member at every facility and remembered them years later. The foundation grew quietly. 5 centers became 15. 15 became 40. By the time Keanu was 60, Stillwater operated 112 facilities across 38 states, serving over 20,000 people annually. It was funded through a combination of Keanu's personal wealth, private donations, and strategic partnerships with corporations that wanted to align their brands with genuine good, which was how he ended up in the Hargrove Foundation Grand Ballroom on a Tuesday evening in October, wearing a department store suit and motorcycle boots, carrying nothing but a quiet certainty that the $650 million partnership he was about to finalize with Hargrove Industries would fund the construction of 200 new healing centers for veterans across the country. 200 centers, 20,000 additional beds, counselors, therapists, job training programs, housing assistance. The largest single expansion in the history of veteran mental health care in America. Everything Keanu had built over the past decade was leading to this moment. He had done his research on Hargrove Industries. The company was a sprawling conglomerate built over 3 generations: energy, real estate, defense contracting, media holdings. On paper, it was one of the most powerful private enterprises in the country. Richard Hargrove, the current patriarch, was 58 years old with silver hair slicked back from a tanned face. The kind of man who had never waited in line for anything and could not conceive of a world in which he might be required to. His wife, Victoria, 55, was a former beauty queen turned philanthropist whose charity work consisted primarily of attending galas where she could be photographed in designer gowns. Their son, Preston, was 14. He attended the most exclusive preparatory school on the East Coast, where annual tuition exceeded what most American families earned in 2 years. He had been raised in an environment of such absolute privilege that the word no had been functionally removed from his vocabulary. His parents treated him not as a child to be raised, but as a performance to be applauded. Keanu knew the type. He had spent decades in Hollywood, surrounded by people who confused wealth with worth and power with character. He did not judge the Hargroves for being rich. He judged them for what they did with it, which, as far as he could tell, was mostly acquire more of it while pretending to care about the world beyond their gated estates. But the partnership was not about the Hargroves as people. It was about what their money could build. 200 centers, 20,000 beds. That calculation was simple enough to override his personal feelings. He had been inside the ballroom for 11 minutes when Preston found him. The boy shouldered through a cluster of guests near the bar, crystal goblet in his right hand, filled to the rim with Chateau Margaux that cost $400 a bottle. His prep school blazer was deliberately untucked, his tie loosened in a calculated display of teenage rebellion that only the truly privileged could afford. 3 friends from his school trailed behind him, phones already raised, recording everything with the gleeful anticipation of children who had learned that cruelty was a form of entertainment. Keanu saw the boy approaching. Years of martial arts training and a lifetime of reading body language in rooms full of unpredictable people had given him an almost instinctive ability to assess threat. Preston's smirk told him everything. The set of the shoulders, the angle of the goblet, the way the boy's eyes flicked toward his parents across the room, checking that they were watching. "Welcome to our party," Preston drawled, stopping directly in front of Keanu. His voice cracked with adolescent uncertainty, but his eyes burned with a malice that had been carefully cultivated by 14 years of watching his parents treat the world as a hierarchy with themselves permanently at the top. Keanu said nothing. He simply looked at the boy, looked at him the way he looked at damaged veterans in his centers, not with anger, but with the quiet recognition of someone who understood that cruelty was almost always a symptom of something deeper. Preston's grin wavered for a fraction of a second under that gaze. Then he committed. His arm shot forward. The wine arced through the air in a red parabola, catching the chandelier light before it crashed across Keanu's face and chest. The expensive black suit turned darker. Droplets ran down his neck. The wine soaked into his shirt, his hair, the shoulders of his jacket. It dripped from his jaw onto the marble floor, each drop landing with a sound that was somehow louder than it should have been. Gasps erupted throughout the ballroom. 600 people turned simultaneously. Phones appeared from every direction. Flashes fired. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure, the silence afterward somehow more deafening than the music had been. And then the laughter. Victoria Hargrove's voice cut across the room first, high and delighted, the laugh of a woman who had spent her life treating other people's discomfort as her personal comedy show. "Oh, Preston," she called, her phone steady as she filmed. "You are terrible." But her tone carried pride so pure it could have been bottled and sold as perfume. Richard Hargrove's deeper chuckle joined his wife's. He turned to the men around him, already crafting the narrative. "Boys will be boys," he announced, spreading his hands in a gesture of theatrical helplessness. "Just a bit of fun. The man can take a joke, can't he?" The men around Richard laughed because Richard expected them to. And in their world, disappointing Richard Hargrove carried consequences that none of them were willing to face. Keanu stood perfectly still. The wine ran down his face. It soaked through his shirt to his skin. It pooled at his feet on the marble floor. The room watched him the way a crowd watches a tightrope walker, suspended between fascination and dread, waiting to see which way the fall would go. But decades of loss had given Keanu something that no amount of money could purchase and no amount of cruelty could take away. He had buried a daughter who never drew breath. He had mourned a woman whose absence still occupied the largest room in his heart. He had sat with veterans who screamed in their sleep, and children who flinched at loud noises, and women who could not look men in the eye without trembling. He knew what real pain looked like. This was not it. This was a 14-year-old boy performing for parents who had taught him that cruelty was currency. So Keanu did something that no one in the ballroom expected. He did not shout. He did not leave. He did not throw a punch or issue a threat or do any of the things that the cameras were desperately hoping to capture. He reached for a napkin from a horrified waiter who was frozen nearby, holding a tray of champagne glasses. Keanu took the napkin and wiped his face slowly, deliberately, with the calm precision of a man removing sawdust after a day in the workshop. He folded the stained napkin once, twice, and placed it neatly on the waiter's tray. "Thank you," he said to the waiter. Then he turned back to Preston, whose grin had started to fade, replaced by confusion. The boy had expected tears, anger, a scene he could replay for his school friends. Instead, he got silence and composure, and he did not know what to do with either. Keanu looked at Preston for a long moment. Then he spoke, softly enough that only those closest could hear. "You have just clarified my final decision." He turned and walked toward the stage at the far end of the ballroom, where he had been scheduled to deliver the keynote address before the formal signing of the partnership agreement. Wine dripped from his arms onto the stairs as he climbed them. The spotlights felt hotter than usual, illuminating every stain, every drop, every dark rivulet running down the fabric of his suit. 600 people watched in absolute silence as Keanu Reeves, soaked in red wine, took his place behind the podium. "Good evening," he began. His voice was steady and clear, carrying to every corner of the room. "I had prepared remarks tonight about partnership, about shared vision, about the future we could build together. But recent events require a different message." In the crowd, Richard Hargrove's smile began to die. The color drained from his tanned face as he realized this was not following the script he had written in his head. Effective immediately, Keanu continued. The Stillwater Foundation is terminating all negotiations regarding the proposed $650 million strategic partnership with Hargrove Industries. The ballroom erupted, not in applause, in shock. The sound of 600 people inhaling simultaneously, of chairs scraping, of phones being raised higher, of the collective realization that something enormous had just shifted in the room. Richard Hargrove's face turned from tan to crimson. Victoria's phone lowered slowly, her painted smile crumbling at the edges. Preston stood frozen where Keanu had left him, the empty goblet still dangling from his fingers, his earlier smugness replaced by the first faint shadow of understanding that his actions had consequences that extended beyond his father's laughter. The Stillwater Foundation operates on three principles, Keanu said, his wine-soaked suit dripping onto the podium. Integrity, respect, dignity for all. We choose our partners based on demonstrated alignment with these principles. Tonight has made it abundantly clear that this alignment does not exist. He paused. His eyes found Richard in the crowd. To quote someone in this room, boys will be boys and companies will be companies. We all make our choices, and we all live with the consequences. His gaze moved to Preston, who had gone pale. I choose to walk away from toxicity, no matter how many beds it might have funded. Because if the foundation that builds those beds is rotten, then everything built on top of it will eventually collapse. The silence was absolute. Even the air seemed to have stopped circulating. Keanu's wine-soaked suit continued to drip onto the stage, each drop striking the wood like a small hammer. I wish you all a lovely evening. He stepped back from the podium and descended the stairs with the same measured calm he had shown throughout. Behind him, the Hargrove family stood exposed in the harsh light of 600 smartphones, their carefully maintained facade cracking in real time as the first social media post began to upload. The clicking of Keanu's boots echoed across the marble as he walked toward the exit. He did not hurry. He did not turn around. The crowd parted for him the way water parts for stone, instinctively and without resistance. Outside, the evening air hit his wine-soaked skin like a cool hand on fever. Marcus Cole, his assistant and closest friend, was already waiting by the car, tablet in hand, face tight with barely contained urgency. "It is everywhere," Marcus said, falling in a step beside Keanu. "The live stream hit 50,000 views before you even finished speaking. It is climbing by the second." Keanu nodded. "Show me." Marcus held up the tablet. Comments flooded faster than the screen could refresh. Thousands of messages, most supportive, some cruel, all passionate. The video of Preston pouring wine on Keanu's head was already being shared across every platform, accumulating views at a rate that suggested it would reach millions by morning. They reached the car. Keanu slid into the back seat, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of what had just happened. The wine had dried on his skin, pulling tight. His shirt clung to his chest. He smelled like a vineyard. "The Hargrove stock is already dropping in after-hours trading," Marcus reported from the seat beside him. "Their Asian markets opened 20 minutes ago. It is not pretty. Their PR team will push back hard tomorrow," Keanu said, watching the city lights blur past the window. "Already on it." "But Keanu," Marcus hesitated, "this is bigger than a canceled deal." The public response. "People are seeing this as something larger. You are becoming a symbol." Keanu closed his eyes briefly. "I never wanted to be a symbol, Marcus. I just wanted to build places where broken people could heal." "I know, but that video of you standing there, not flinching, not retaliating, just standing with wine running down your face, and then walking to the podium and calmly dismantling a $650 million deal." Marcus shook his head. "People are calling it the most powerful thing they have ever seen." Keanu said nothing. He thought about the 200 centers that would not be built, 20,000 beds that would not exist, veterans who would wait longer for help, children like Lily Caldwell, the 12-year-old girl at his Portland facility who had lost both parents and slept with the light on because darkness reminded her of the closet where she used to hide when the fighting started. He had sacrificed their futures tonight. He knew that. The mathematics of it sat in his chest like a stone. But some equations had variables that could not be quantified. If he had signed that partnership after what happened, he would have been telling every person in every Stillwater Center that dignity was negotiable, that respect could be purchased, that the right amount of money made humiliation acceptable. He could not do that. Not to them. Not to himself. Not to the memory of a daughter who never opened her eyes and a woman who never got to grow old. The car pulled into his building's garage. He rode the elevator to his apartment on the 7th floor, a modest two-bedroom that looked nothing like the home of a man who had once been worth hundreds of millions. The furniture was simple. The walls held photographs of people, not things. Jennifer's smile. A group shot of Stillwater staff at the Portland Center. Lily Caldwell holding up a drawing she had made of a house with flowers in every window. He peeled off the ruined suit and stood under a hot shower until the water ran clear. The wine washed away, but the memory of Preston's grin, the sound of Victoria's laughter, the cold amusement in Richard's voice, those did not drain with the water. He was toweling off when his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Mr. Reeves, my name is Dorothy Whitfield. I worked for the Hargrove family for 30 years as their head housekeeper. What happened to you tonight was not an isolated incident. I have documents, recordings, and evidence of things they have done that would destroy them completely. Things they have paid millions to keep hidden. I am ready to share everything. Please meet with me. It is time someone held them accountable. Keanu read the message twice. The language was precise, formal. The message of someone who had spent decades observing and recording and waiting for the right moment. He typed a response. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, the Stillwater Foundation office on Franklin Street. Tell security you are here for a private meeting with me. Dorothy's reply came immediately. I will be there. Thank you for standing up to them tonight. You are not alone in this fight anymore. Keanu set his phone on the nightstand and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. Outside, the city hummed with its eternal restlessness. Inside his chest, something was shifting. A tectonic movement. The beginning of something that would grow far larger than a canceled deal or a viral video. He did not sleep. Dorothy Whitfield arrived at precisely 8 the next morning. She was 72 years old, with silver white hair styled simply and practically, the way a woman styles her hair when she has spent decades prioritizing function over vanity. She wore a pressed navy cardigan over a white blouse. Her shoes were sensible. Her posture was impeccable, the straight spine of someone who had carried invisible weight for 3 decades and refused to let it bend her. The leather satchel she carried looked heavy against her slight frame. She set it on the conference table with the careful reverence of someone handling something sacred. Thank you for seeing me, she said. Her voice was soft but steady, the voice of a woman who had been quiet for a very long time and had finally decided that silence was a luxury she could no longer afford. Thank you for coming, Keanu replied. They sat across from each other. Marcus stood nearby, tablet in hand. Catherine Brennan, the Foundation's chief legal counsel, a 45-year-old woman with auburn hair and gray eyes sharp enough to cut glass, sat at the far end of the table with a legal pad and 3 pens lined up in parallel. Dorothy unclasped the satchel. I started keeping records my first week, she said. The way they spoke to the staff, especially anyone they considered beneath them, I knew I needed proof. Nobody would believe it otherwise. She withdrew a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages yellowed with age. 30 years of daily logs. Every cruel comment, every firing without cause, every complaint that was buried, every person whose life they destroyed because they could. Keanu opened the first journal, dated 1993. Dorothy's handwriting was precise, each entry time-stamped and detailed. The first page documented Richard Hargrove's father berating a groundskeeper until the man quit, then laughing about saving money on his severance. They never saw me as a threat, Dorothy continued, removing more items from the satchel. I was just a help. Invisible. They would say and do anything in front of me. She placed a small digital recorder on the table. 12 years ago, I started carrying this. She pressed play. Richard Hargrove's voice filled the conference room, discussing how to force out a senior executive who had discovered accounting irregularities. Plant something in his office, the recording said. Everyone knows people like him cannot be trusted with money anyway. How many recordings? Catherine asked, her pen already moving. Hundreds, but that is not all. Dorothy produced a manila envelope stuffed with photographs. Private parties, board meetings, family gatherings, the things they bragged about, the deals they celebrated breaking, the people they laughed about destroying. They spent the next 3 hours reviewing the evidence chronologically. Dorothy's meticulous organization revealed patterns spanning 3 decades. Financial manipulation, systematic mistreatment of employees, calculated destruction of competitors through bribery and blackmail. But this, Dorothy said, withdrawing a thick folder, this is what you need most. She spread internal memos and financial documents across the table. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes widening. They have been embezzling from their own company for years, Dorothy explained. That deal with your foundation, they needed it to cover hundreds of millions in missing funds before the next audit. Keanu studied the papers. The numbers were damning. Shell companies, offshore accounts, falsified financial statements going back 2 decades. They were going to use the Stillwater partnership to hide their theft, Dorothy said. Richard's gambling debts, Victoria's spending, private jets, hidden properties, bribes to keep other scandals quiet. They have built their entire lives on other people's broken dreams. Catherine sorted the documents into categories, her expression growing darker with each new revelation. This is not just corporate misconduct. This is criminal enterprise, tax fraud, embezzlement, witness tampering, destruction of evidence. Why now? Keanu asked gently. After keeping this for so long. Dorothy's hands trembled. My granddaughter sent me that video last night. Watching you stand there, dripping with wine while they laughed. She pressed her lips together. I saw myself. 30 years of staying quiet. Watching them hurt people. Staying quiet to keep my job, to protect my family. But seeing you refuse to break, it woke something in me. Her eyes met Keanu's. My husband James was a pastor. He died 11 years ago. He used to tell me that truth does not need anyone to believe in it to survive. It just needs someone to remember it. I have been remembering for 30 years. It is time to speak. She paused, and something moved across her face that was older than the moment, older than the room, older than both of them. I raised 2 children while working in that house. My son Thomas and my daughter Grace. Every evening, I would come home smelling of their floor polish and their laundry detergent, and my children would hug me and ask me how my day was. And I would smile and say fine because I could not tell a 6-year-old boy that his mother spent the afternoon being called names by people who wore shoes that cost more than our rent. Her voice did not waver, but her hands pressed flat against the table, steadying something inside herself. James told me once, keep the records. He said, Dorothy, you're not just cleaning their house. You are witnessing their character. And someday, when the right person comes along, that witness will matter. He died before he could see this day, but he knew it would come. She looked at the stack of journals, at the recorder, at the photographs, at 30 years of her life compressed into a leather satchel on a conference room table. Every night, after my shift, I would sit at my kitchen table and write. Date, time, what was said, who was present. My hands were tired from scrubbing their marble and polishing their silver, but I wrote anyway. Because James was right. Someone would need to know. Keanu reached across the table and covered her weathered hands with his own. They will try to discredit you. They will try to paint you as a disgruntled employee. Let them try. Every document is dated. Every photo has metadata. Every recording is time-stamped. I knew someday someone would need this evidence. I made sure everything would hold up. Catherine was already on the phone with forensic specialists. Marcus had begun organizing the digital archive. The scope of what lay before them was staggering. Not just ammunition for a corporate dispute, but evidence of decades of criminal behavior protected by wealth and influence. I will protect you, Keanu promised. We will do this right. Every document verified. Every recording authenticated. And then we bring it all to light. Dorothy nodded, relief visible in the softening of her shoulders. It is time someone showed them they're not above the law. But the Hargroves were not waiting passively. By noon the next day, Richard Hargrove had filed a lawsuit against Keanu and the Stillwater Foundation, claiming defamation and breach of contract. The legal filing described Keanu as emotionally unstable and characterized his decision to cancel the partnership as erratic behavior driven by personal psychological issues. Marcus showed Keanu the headlines on his tablet. Gregory's tried to reframe the whole narrative, he said. The screen showed Richard on the courthouse steps in an expertly tailored suit, his face arranged in practiced concern. Mr. Reeves's shocking behavior has forced us to take legal action, Richard was telling the cameras. His unfounded accusations and erratic decision-making have already cost our shareholders millions. We tried to handle this privately, but his continued instability leaves us no choice. Then came the deeper attacks. Hargrove's team hired private investigators who produced surveillance photographs of Keanu leaving his building, meeting with Dorothy, entering the Stillwater offices. They compiled a dossier on his personal history, weaponizing the very losses that had shaped him. The headline made Keanu's stomach turn. Former action star's history of personal tragedy raises questions about mental fitness to lead major foundation. The article detailed Ava's death, Jennifer's accident, his withdrawal from Hollywood. It framed his grief as evidence of instability, turning his deepest wounds into ammunition. They're trying to make your pain look like weakness, Marcus said quietly. Keanu stared at the screen. They were using Jennifer, using Ava, using the worst moments of his life as a weapon to destroy the thing he had built from those ashes. Then the financial pressure began. Banks suspended transaction processing for Stillwater accounts. Partners pulled back. 7 major corporate sponsors requested emergency meetings. Credit lines were frozen. Projects stalled. They are trying to strangle us financially, Catherine reported, running the numbers. At current burn rate, we have maybe 3 weeks before facilities start closing. Facilities. That word meant people. Veterans who needed counseling. Children who needed safe beds. Women rebuilding lives. 3 weeks. And some of them would have nowhere to go. And then the fabricated video dropped. Preston Hargrove appeared on national television, sitting beside a famous interviewer, tears streaming down his face. I was so scared, Preston sobbed. He cornered me backstage before the gala started. He said if my family did not give his foundation what he wanted, he would destroy us. The interviewer leaned forward with practiced concern. That must have been terrifying for you, Preston. You were just a child. I did not know what to do, Preston whimpered. He was so aggressive. That is why I acted out. I was just scared and trying to protect myself. The camera cut to Victoria, holding her son's hand, her earlier hysteria replaced by cold composure. No child should feel threatened by a man using charity as leverage for personal vendettas. Then came the footage. Grainy security camera video showing what appeared to be Keanu approaching Preston in a dim hallway, his body language aggressive. A distorted voice played. Teach you what happens. Mess with me, your whole family. Keanu watched it in his apartment. He had never spoken to Preston before the wine incident. He had never been in that hallway. The video was completely fabricated. But fabrication did not matter when it confirmed what people wanted to believe. Social media split in half. Supporters rallied behind Keanu with hashtags. Opponents seized on the video as proof that the former action star had finally lost his grip on reality. News programs ran panels debating his mental state. Commentators questioned his fitness to lead a major foundation. The narrative was shifting slowly but deliberately, from Hargrove's cruelty to Keanu's supposed instability. That night, alone in his apartment, the attacks finally broke through. It was not the lawsuit, not the financial pressure, not even the fabricated video. It was a photograph that someone had found and published. Jennifer, 8 months pregnant with Ava, laughing in sunlight on a beach in Malibu. The photo was being used as illustration for an article questioning Keanu's obsessive attachment to past trauma. He sat on the floor of his apartment with his back against the wall, holding his phone, staring at Jennifer's face. She was so beautiful in that photograph, so alive, so completely unaware of what was coming. Something broke, not loudly, not dramatically. It was the quiet breaking of a man who had spent 20 years building a wall around his grief and had just felt the first crack run from foundation to crown. He pressed his phone against his chest and close his eyes and let the darkness have him for a while. He did not cry. He was past crying. He simply sat in the dark and felt the full weight of everything he had lost and everything he stood to lose. The centers, the people who depended on them, Dorothy's trust, his own sense of purpose. For the first time since Jennifer died, he wondered if the world actually needed him in it. The thought lasted 3 seconds. Then he heard a voice in his memory. Not Jennifer's, not his own, Dorothy Whitfield's. You are not alone in this fight anymore. And then another voice, smaller, younger, Lily Caldwell, 12 years old, sitting in an oversized armchair in the Portland Center, asking him with absolute sincerity whether broken things could learn to work again. He had told her yes. He had looked into the eyes of a child who had lost everything, who slept with the light on, who trusted him enough to ask the hardest question a broken person can ask, and he had said yes. If he gave up now, that yes became a lie, and he had promised himself, the night Jennifer died, that he would never lie to a child, not about anything that mattered. He opened his eyes. The dawn came slowly, gray and reluctant, as if even the sun was uncertain about what this day would bring. Keanu was already dressed when the knock came at 6 in the morning. He opened the door to find Dorothy standing there, carrying a thermos and a paper bag that smelled like fresh bread. You need to eat something, she said. Cannot fight on an empty stomach. He almost smiled. He took the coffee, and its warmth spread through his hands and into his chest, not fixing anything, but reminding him that warmth still existed. Show me that video again, Keanu said, sitting at his kitchen table. The raw file, not the broadcast version. Marcus arrived 20 minutes later with his tablet and 3 laptops. Catherine called in on a secure line. They watched the fabricated footage frame by frame. There, Keanu said, pressing pause. Look at the reflection in that brass door handle. They leaned closer. In the curved surface, a faint reflection showed the hallway. Empty. Nothing but a cleaning cart. No figures at all. Timestamp 1942-15, Marcus read. But in the main footage, that is when you're supposedly confronting Preston. The reflection does not match the action, Keanu said. They digitally inserted figures into existing hallway footage and forgot about reflective surfaces. Sloppy work, Dorothy said. They rushed it. Something ignited in Keanu's chest. Not anger. Something sharper. The focused clarity that came from knowing exactly what needed to be done. Give me a top digital forensics expert, he told Marcus. Someone who can testify about video manipulation under oath. Get the venue's security system records. Installation date, maintenance log, hardware spécification. And call Barbara Lawson. Marcus's eyes widened. Barbara Lawson was the most respected broadcast journalist in the country. 62 years old, silver-haired, 40 years of unflinching integrity. She had brought down corrupt politicians and exposed corporate scandals with the kind of methodical precision that left no room for counterattack. She will not do softball interviews, Marcus warned. I do not want softball. I want truth. The press conference was scheduled for 9 the following morning. Keanu insisted on an outdoor stage, open to the public, no controlled environment, no carefully curated audience. Just him, a podium, and whatever the world wanted to throw at him. He wore a simple white shirt. No suit, no tie, no armor of any kind. Just a man standing in morning sunlight, looking directly into cameras that would carry his face and his words to millions. Good morning, he began. 3 days ago, a 14-year-old boy poured wine on my head while his parents laughed. Yesterday, that same family released a fabricated video designed to destroy my reputation and my life's work. Today, I'm going to show you the truth about both. He gestured to the massive screen behind him, where the Hargroves doctored footage began to play. Watch carefully. This video was released showing what they claim was me threatening Preston Hargrove before the gala. Now look at this brass door handle at timestamp 1942-15. The footage froze. Enhanced. The door handle's reflection filled the screen, showing an empty hallway that contradicted everything in the foreground. The crowd murmured. Cameras clicked like mechanical insects. A forensics expert took the podium, presenting metadata analysis that proved the video had been edited using professional software at 3:47 that morning, hours before its release. Then Keanu motioned off stage. "Mrs. Dorothy Whitfield, please join me." Dorothy walked to the podium carrying her weathered satchel. The crowd fell silent as this elderly woman, small and dignified, began to speak. "For 30 years, I worked in a Hargrove household. I documented everything I witnessed." She opened the first journal. The pages were yellow. The handwriting was precise. March 15th, 1993. Richard Hargrove ordered me to falsify cleaning staff payroll, deducting hours from workers who could not protest. She continued, entry after entry, recording after recording. Richard's voice, clear and unmistakable, ordering evidence destroyed, threatening employees, discussing illegal financial schemes. Keanu returned to the podium. "What you're hearing is not workplace misconduct. It is organized criminal activity. These records show systematic theft exceeding hundreds of millions of dollars. These memos detail intentional destruction of evidence. And these emails prove that the Hargrove family planned to use our partnership to hide embezzled funds before their next audit." He faced the cameras directly. They never intended to honor our agreement. They needed the Stillwater Foundation's reputation to cover their crimes. When I refused to play along, they tried to destroy me. When I stood my ground, they fabricated evidence against me. When that was not enough, they attacked my grief, my losses, the memory of people I love, because they believe that pain is weakness and weakness is something to exploit. His voice remained steady, but something in it had changed, a depth that had not been there before. The resonance of a man speaking not from script but from scar tissue. They were wrong. Pain is not weakness. Pain is what teaches you what matters. And what matters is this: every veteran sleeping in a Stillwater bed tonight. Every child who found safety in one of our centers. Every person who walked through our doors broken and walked out standing taller. He paused. That is what they tried to destroy. Not a business deal, not a reputation, but the shelter of people who have already lost everything. The crowd was silent. Then from somewhere in the back, a single person began to clap. Then another. Then a wave that built until it crashed across the assembled crowd like something physical, something you could feel in your chest. Within hours, federal agents entered Hargrove Industries headquarters. Live helicopter footage showed Richard attempting to flee through a parking garage. He was tackled on the concrete plaza, his face hitting the ground, blood spotting his white collar. Cameras captured every second. Victoria was arrested at their estate, caught trying to destroy evidence on her phone. Preston was removed from school for mandatory psychological evaluation. The empire built on 3 generations of inherited cruelty collapsed in a single afternoon. In the days that followed, the financial evidence proved even more damning than Dorothy's journals had suggested. Forensic accountants uncovered offshore accounts, shell companies, falsified tax returns, and a web of bribery and corruption that stretched back decades. The Hargrove Foundation, which had hosted the gala where Preston poured wine on Keanu's head, turned out to be nothing more than a money laundering operation disguised as charity. Former employees came forward by the dozens. Stories of abuse, discrimination, wrongful termination, blacklisting. People who had been silenced for years finally found their voices, emboldened by Dorothy's example. Keanu watched it all from a distance. He took no pleasure in the Hargrove's downfall. He felt what he always felt when he witnessed suffering, even the suffering of people who had caused him harm. A heaviness, a recognition that destruction, however justified, was still destruction. The Stillwater Foundation's accounts were unfrozen. Partners returned. New offers poured in. The foundation emerged from the crisis stronger than before, its reputation enhanced by what the media was calling the most dignified response to public humiliation in modern history. But Keanu was not thinking about reputation or business deals. He was thinking about a 14-year-old boy who was now alone in a world he had never been prepared to navigate. The letter arrived 3 months later. It was handwritten on plain notebook paper, the kind sold in bulk at drugstores. The handwriting was careful but unsteady, the penmanship of someone who was not accustomed to writing by hand and was trying very hard to get the words right. Mr. Reeves, I do not know why I'm writing to you. I think about that night every day. When the wine hit your face and you did not move. You just looked at me. Nobody has ever looked at me like that. Not angry, not scared, just seeing me. Like actually seeing me and not the name or the money or the uniform. I did not understand it then. I still do not entirely understand it now. My parents are in prison. My friends are gone. Everyone who used to answer my calls has changed their numbers. I am living in a supervised facility, and they make me talk to a therapist 3 times a week. She asked me why I did what I did, and I never have a good answer. I think the truth is that I did it because it was the only way I knew how to get my father to notice me. He never hugged me, not once. My mother only paid attention when I performed for her. The wine was a performance. I did not see you as a person. I saw you as a prop in a show I was putting on for my parents. I know that is terrible. I know saying sorry does not fix anything. But I am sorry. I am really sorry. Preston. Keanu read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and placed it inside the leather journal he kept on his nightstand. The journal where he sometimes wrote letters to Jennifer and Ava that he would never send. He took the letter to Dorothy Whitfield's son, Thomas Reed. Thomas was 65 years old, a pastor like his late father James. He ran a small community church in Brooklyn that served as an unofficial gathering place for people who had fallen through every net society had strung beneath them. Thomas read the letter slowly. When he finished, he looked up at Keanu. This boy did not write to ask for forgiveness. He wrote because he's trying to figure out who he is without the money and the name and the parents telling him who to be. I know, Keanu said. What are you going to do? Keanu was quiet for a long time. He thought about Ava, about the daughter who never opened her eyes, about all the things he would have taught her if the world had been kinder, about how every child deserves at least one adult who looks at them and sees not what they have done, but what they could become. I'm going to visit him, Keanu said. The supervised facility was a converted brownstone on a quiet street. Preston was in a common room when Keanu arrived, sitting in a plastic chair by a window, wearing a plain gray sweatshirt and jeans. No blazer, no designer clothes, no gleaming watch. Just a thin, pale 14-year-old boy who looked like he had aged 5 years and 3 months. When Preston saw Keanu walk through the door, he stood so fast the chair toppled backward. His face went white. His hands clenched at his sides. I'm not here to hurt you, Keanu said. He raised both hands, palms outward. I came because you wrote to me, and your letter deserved more than a written response. Preston stared at him. His chest was heaving. Without his parents, without his school friends, without the architecture of wealth and privilege that had propped him up his entire life, he was exactly what Dorothy had described decades of Hargrove children being, a product of a system that manufactured cruelty and called it strength. Keanu pulled up a chair and sat down. He did not rush. He did not fill the silence with reassurance or platitudes. He simply sat and waited. The way he sat with veterans who were not ready to talk, the way he sat with children who needed to know that the adult in the room was not going anywhere. Preston remained standing for a long time. Then, slowly, he picked up his toppled chair and sat back down. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The common room was empty except for them. Afternoon light came through the window, falling across the worn carpet in pale rectangles. You said in your letter that nobody ever looked at you, Keanu finally said. Not really. What did you mean by that? Preston's jaw worked. My father looked through me, like I was a window he was trying to see past. My mother looked at me like I was a mirror that was supposed to reflect her. My friends looked at me like I was a credit card. His voice cracked. He stared at the floor. That night at the gala, when the wine hit you and you just stood there, I thought something was wrong with you. I thought you were broken or stupid or something. Because everyone I know would have reacted, would have yelled or hit me or stormed out. He looked up. His eyes were red. But you just looked at me. And I felt for the first time like someone actually saw me. Not the Hargrove name. Not the money. Just me. And it was the worst feeling I have ever had. Because what you saw was ugly. Keanu let the words settle. He did not rush to contradict them or soften their edges. Sometimes the most important thing you could do for someone was let their truth exist without immediately trying to fix it. I lost a daughter, Keanu said quietly. She was born too early and never took a breath. I named her Ava. Then I lost her mother, the woman I loved more than anything in this world. For years after that, I wanted to disappear. I wanted the world to stop noticing me, stop needing things from me, stop expecting me to be anything other than empty. Preston was very still. Do you know what pulled me back? It was not success or money or therapy, though those helped. It was a 12-year-old girl named Lily in one of my centers in Portland. She had lost both her parents. She slept with the light on because darkness reminded her of hiding in a closet. One day, she asked me to help with her math homework, and while we were working on fractions, she said something I have never forgotten. He paused. She said, "Mr. Keanu, do you think broken things can learn to work again, even if they do not look the same as before?" Preston's breathing had changed. It was uneven now, catching his chest. I told her yes, and I have spent every day since trying to prove that answer right. Not just for her, for every person in every Stillwater Center. For myself. He looked at Preston directly. Your father taught you that power means making other people smaller. That respect is something you take by force. That cruelty is entertainment and kindness is weakness. He was wrong about all of it. Preston's face crumpled. Not the theatrical tears of the television interview. This was different. This was the raw, graceless collapse of a child who had built his entire identity on a foundation that had just been revealed as hollow. I do not know who I am, Preston whispered. Without the money, without the name, without them telling me what to do and who to be. I do not know who I am. Nobody does at 14, Keanu said. That is the whole point of being 14. You get to figure it out. How? By building something instead of breaking it. By learning that your hands can create, not just destroy. By discovering that the feeling you get from helping someone is 1,000 times more powerful than the feeling you got from pouring wine on my head. Preston wiped his face with his sleeve. You really believe that? I build 112 centers on that belief. I have 20,000 people sleeping in safe beds tonight because of it. Yes, I believe it. Keanu reached into his jacket and withdrew a card. Plain white. The Stillwater Foundation logo. An address. A phone number. When you are ready, there's a place for you. Not as punishment, as opportunity. We run volunteer programs at every center. Kitchen work. Maintenance. Reading to kids. Sitting with veterans who need someone to listen. He set the card on the table between them. You do not owe me anything. What happened between us is between us. But if you want to find out who Preston Hargrove is when he is not performing for an audience, this is a place to start. Preston stared at the card the way a man in a desert stares at water, wanting it desperately, but not trusting it to be real. Why would you do this? His voice was barely audible. I humiliated you in front of the whole world. Yes, you did. And you're just going to sit here and offer me a chance. It is not just for you. It is for the person you could become. And for the people you could help if you choose to become that person. He stood up. His knees reminded him they were 60 years old, as they always did. He looked at Preston one more time. Your father never hugged you. I know what it is like to grow up without the things you need from the people who are supposed to give them. It leaves a hole. You spent 14 years trying to fill that hole with the wrong things. Maybe it is time to try filling it with the right ones. He walked toward the door, then stopped without turning around. And Preston, the woman who gave me the evidence that brought your family down. Her name is Dorothy Whitfield. She worked in your house for 30 years. She cleaned your room. She cooked your meals. She knew your favorite breakfast. And your family never once asked her last name. You let that sit in the air. Start by learning people's names. The rest follows. He left. 3 months later, Preston Hargrove walked through the doors of the Stillwater Foundation Center in Portland, Oregon. He arrived with nothing but a small backpack and the card Keanu had given him, worn soft at the edges from being carried in his pocket every day for 90 days. The first morning was the hardest. He woke at 5:30 to the sound of an alarm that nobody had ever made him set for himself. He dressed in the plain gray uniform that all volunteers wore, the same uniform, regardless of who they were or where they came from. No logos, no labels, no way to tell a former billionaire's son from a former dishwasher. That was the point. He started in the kitchen, washing dishes, mopping floors, carrying trays to tables where veterans sat with haunted eyes and hands that sometimes shook. Work that his father would have called beneath a Hargrove. Work that Preston discovered was harder, more exhausting, and more meaningful than anything he had ever done in his life. He did not tell anyone his name. He introduced himself as Preston, just Preston, no last name. The staff knew, of course. Keanu had briefed them, but they treated him the way they treated every volunteer, with expectation, accountability, and the kind of firm kindness that said, "We believe you can do this, and we will not accept less than your best." He met Lily Caldwell on his third day. She was sitting in the common room, reading a book that was too advanced for her age, her legs tucked beneath her in an oversized armchair. She looked up when Preston walked past, studied him with the unfiltered directness that only children possess, and said, "You are the one who poured wine on Mr. Keanu." Preston froze. "Yes. Why did you do that?" He stood in the doorway, a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. And for the second time in his life, a simple question from a child stripped away every defense he had. "Because I did not know how to get my parents to notice me any other way." Lily considered this with the gravity of a 12-year-old who had experienced more loss than most adults. "My parents are dead," she said. "I would give anything to have them notice me, even once." Preston could not speak. He stood there, holding the mop, and felt something crack open in his chest that he had been trying to keep sealed since the night of the gala. "I am sorry," he finally said, and he was not apologizing for the wine. He was apologizing for every moment of his privileged life that he had wasted being cruel when he could have been kind. Lily nodded, as though she understood exactly what he meant. "Mr. Keanu says broken things can learn to work again, even if they do not look the same. Do you believe that? I'm sitting here, am I not?" Something shifted in Preston Hargrove that afternoon. Not a dramatic transformation, not a movie montage, a seed planted in soil that had been barren for 14 years, finally receiving its first drop of water. He continued volunteering. Weeks became months. He learned to cook breakfast for 40 people. He learned to make beds with hospital corners. He learned the names of every veteran in the center, their stories, their fears, their small victories. He sat with a man named Robert who had served 3 tours in the Middle East and could not sleep without the lights on, just like Lily. Robert did not talk much. Most days he sat by the window in the common room and watched the street outside as though expecting a convoy that would never come. But one afternoon, Preston brought him coffee without being asked, and Robert looked at him, really looked at him, and said, "You are that kid from the video?" Preston nodded. He braced for anger, for contempt, for the disgust he had seen on so many faces since the gala. Robert sipped his coffee. "I poured worse things on people in Fallujah," he said. "The question is not what you did. The question is what you do next." From that moment, something changed between them. Robert started talking. Not about the war, not at first, but about small things. The weather, the coffee, the book someone had left on the table. And Preston listened, because listening was a skill he had never been taught, and he discovered that it was the hardest and most rewarding thing he had ever attempted. Weeks later, Robert told him about Fallujah, about the night raid that went wrong, about the family in the house that was supposed to be empty, about the faces that visited him at 3 in the morning and would not leave no matter how many lights he turned on. Preston sat in the chair beside him and said nothing, because he had learned from Keanu that sometimes the most important thing you could offer another human being was your presence. He read to children who had never been read to. He listened to women describe the homes they were rebuilding and felt the inadequacy of everything he had ever been taught about strength. And slowly, patiently, with the kind of incremental progress that cannot be photographed or hashtagged or reduced to a viral moment, Preston Hargrove began to change. The ceremony took place 6 months after the gala. Not a press conference, not a media event, a small gathering in the same ballroom where Preston had poured wine on Keanu's head. The room had been rented for the occasion, its marble floors and crystal chandeliers unchanged but somehow transformed by the people who now filled it. It was the inauguration of the Dorothy Whitfield Center for Truth and Dignity. Funded by the Stillwater Foundation and supported by donations from thousands of ordinary people who had been moved by Dorothy's courage, the center would provide legal support for whistleblowers, advocacy for mistreated workers, and a permanent archive of testimony from people whose stories had been silenced by power and money. Dorothy sat in the front row, wearing deep purple silk, her silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Beside her sat her son Thomas, his hand resting on his mother's arm. Behind them, the seats were filled with former Hargrove employees, current Stillwater staff, volunteers, veterans, and children from centers across the country who had traveled to witness this moment. Lily Caldwell sat in the second row, wearing a blue dress that one of the center's counselors had helped her pick out. She held a small notebook in which she had written down what she wanted to remember about this day, because she had learned early that memories were precious and should be treated with care. Keanu stood at the podium. He wore a simple dark suit, not the one that had been stained with wine. A new one, but his boots were the same. His hair still fell to his shoulders, silver-streaked through dark. His face still carried the map of everything he had survived. He did not look like a celebrity or a mogul or a public figure. He looked like what he was, a man who had lost everything and built something from the wreckage. 6 months ago, in this room, he began, a boy poured wine on my head. His parents laughed. 600 people watched. And for a moment, the world saw what it looks like when privilege believes it has no consequences. He paused. But this story is not about a glass of wine. It is about what happened after. It is about a woman named Dorothy Whitfield who spent 30 years keeping records because she believed that truth was worth preserving even when nobody was listening. It is about the people who came forward after she did, finding their voices because she had found hers. It is about a foundation that was nearly destroyed and emerged stronger. And it is about something that surprised even me. He looked toward the back of the room. A door opened, and Preston Hargrove walked in. The room went silent. People turned. Some faces hardened. Some showed surprise. A few showed something closer to hostility. They knew who this boy was. They had seen the video. Preston walked forward. He wore a plain white shirt and dark pants. No blazer. No prep school insignia. No design or anything. His hands were marked with small cuts and calluses from months of kitchen work and maintenance, and 100 small labors that came with learning to be useful instead of entitled. He reached the stage. Keanu stepped aside. Preston stood behind the podium and looked out at a room full of people who had every reason to despise him. His voice, when it came, was thin and unsteady, but it was real. 6 months ago, I stood in this room and did something that I will be ashamed of for the rest of my life. I poured wine on a man's head because my father laughed when I was cruel and my mother applauded when I performed. I was 14 years old, and I had never been taught that respect does not depend on how much money someone has. He swallowed hard. His eyes were bright. After my parents were arrested, everyone I knew disappeared. Every friend, every phone call, every person who had smiled at me my whole life turned out to be smiling at my family's bank account. I was alone for the first time, and I discovered that without the name and the money, I did not know who I was. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. Mr. Reeves visited me when I was at the lowest point of my life. He did not yell at me. He did not lecture me. He sat down and he told me about his daughter who never got to breathe and the woman he loved who was taken from him. And then he offered me something that nobody in my family ever offered anyone. A chance. He opened the envelope. Inside was a check. Not for millions. Not for hundreds of thousands. For a small amount that represented everything Preston had earned through 6 months of work at minimum wage at the Stillwater Center. Every dollar he had saved from the small stipend the facility provided. This is everything I have. It is not much. I know that better than anyone. But it is the first money I have ever earned by helping people instead of hurting them. And I wanted to go to this center. To Mrs. Whitfield's center. because she spent 30 years being invisible in my family's house, and she deserved to be seen the entire time. He looked at Dorothy in the front row. The elderly woman's face was streaming with tears. Her son held her hand. I cannot fix what my family did. I cannot undo the people they hurt or the lives they destroyed. But I can start building something different. Starting today. Starting with this. He placed a check on the podium. And Mrs. Whitfield, I am sorry. For all of it. For 30 years of my family treating you like you were invisible. For never learning your name when you were the one who made sure my sheets were clean and my breakfast was warm. I see you now. I am sorry it took so long. Dorothy rose from her seat. The room held its breath. She walked to the stage slowly, her steps deliberate, carrying the weight and the grace of a woman who had waited 3 decades for this moment. She climbed the stairs and stood face to face with the boy whose family had taken her youth, her silence, her dignity. She looked at him for a long time. Preston stood rigid, bracing himself for whatever came next. Then Dorothy Whitfield did something that broke every heart in the room. She opened her arms and pulled Preston into a hug. The boy collapsed against her like a building whose foundation had finally given way, and for the first time since anyone could remember, Preston Hargrove cried without performing, without audience, without agenda. He simply cried, and the woman who had cleaned his room for the first 6 years of his life held him the way no one in his family ever had. Keanu watched from the side of the stage. His throat was tight. His eyes burned. He thought about Ava, about the child he never got to hold, about how the cruelest thing in the world was a child without someone to teach them that love was not something you earned through performance, but something you deserved simply by existing. Dorothy stepped back, holding Preston by the shoulders. She looked into his face and said, loud enough for every microphone and every person in the room to hear, forgiveness is not a reward for people who deserve it. It is a gift that sets both people free. You're forgiven, child. Now, go build something worthy of it. The room erupted, not in the polite applause of galas and award ceremonies, in the raw, uncontrolled outpouring of people who had just witnessed something they did not fully have words for. People stood. People cried. Veterans who had not wept in years wiped their faces with rough hands. Children looked up at the adults around them with wide eyes, absorbing a lesson about mercy that no textbook could teach. Keanu returned to the podium. He stood beside Dorothy and Preston, and he spoke one final time. We live in a world that teaches us that strength means never bending, that power means never apologizing, that winning means making sure someone else loses. The Hargrove family believed that. They built an empire on it, and that empire is gone. He looked at Dorothy. But the woman who cleaned their floors is standing on this stage. And the boy who poured wine on my head is standing beside her, holding a check that he earned by mopping floors and cooking breakfasts and learning the names of people his family never bothered to see. He looked at the audience. That is not weakness. That is the hardest kind of strength there is. The strength to change. The strength to say I was wrong and mean it. The strength to forgive when the world tells you that vengeance is your right. He paused. The room was silent. I lost a daughter and a woman I loved. For years, I thought those losses had taken everything from me. But they gave me something too. They gave me the ability to recognize pain in others, to sit with it without flinching, to understand that every person standing in front of you, whether they're a 72-year-old housekeeper or a 14-year-old boy who just emptied his bank account, is carrying something you cannot see. His voice dropped lower, not for effect, but because the words were coming from a place that was deeper than performance. Respect is not something you earn with money or power or a famous name. It is something every human being is born with. The only question is whether the people around them will honor it or try to strip it away. He looked at the room one final time. Dorothy honored it by remembering. Preston is learning to honor it by rebuilding. And every person in every Stillwater Center, every veteran, every child, every woman starting over, they honor it by getting up every morning and choosing to believe that tomorrow can be different from yesterday. He stepped back from the podium. That is the only legacy worth building. The applause that followed was not the loudest Keanu had ever heard. but it was the truest. Later that evening, long after the ceremony had ended and the guests had gone and the ballroom had emptied, Keanu stood alone on the stage where he had been soaked in wine 6 months ago. The chandeliers were dimmed. The chairs were stacked. The marble floor gleamed in the low light. He looked at the spot where he had stood while wine ran down his face. He could still feel it. The cold shock, the public shame, the 600 pairs of eyes. But he could also feel what had come after. Dorothy's courage, the Foundation's survival, Preston's letter written in shaky handwriting on drugstore notebook paper, Lily Caldwell in the second row, writing in her notebook so she would remember, a hug on a stage that healed something 30 years old. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a photograph. Jennifer, laughing in sunlight on a beach in Malibu, 8 months pregnant with Ava, beautiful and alive, and completely unaware of what was coming. He held the photograph for a long time. Then he whispered, so quietly that only the empty room could hear, "I think I finally understand why you sent me here. Not to disappear, but to stay, to keep showing up, to keep building." He slipped the photograph back into his pocket, beside his heart, where it had lived for 20 years. He walked out of the ballroom and into the night. The city was alive around him. Somewhere, Dorothy Whitfield was reading a book in her apartment, finally free of the secrets she had carried for 3 decades. Somewhere, Preston Hargrove was lying in a simple bed in a shared room, exhausted from the hardest and best day of his young life, holding a Stillwater Foundation volunteer badge with his first name and no last name. Somewhere, Lily Caldwell was sleeping with the light on, but tonight, for the first time in a long time, the light was not because she was afraid. It was because she wanted to be able to see the new notebook on her shelf, so she could remember that today had been real. And somewhere, in 112 centers across 38 states, 20,000 people were sleeping in safe beds because a man who lost everything decided to build something from the wreckage. Not for fame, not for legacy, not for revenge against a world that had taken the people he loved most. For the simple, stubborn, unshakable belief that broken things can learn to work again, even if they do not look the same as before. Especially then, and somewhere in a quiet office in a building that now bore her name, a handwritten sign hung on the wall, written in the careful penmanship of a woman who had spent 30 years remembering when the world told her to forget. It read, in letters as steady and certain as the woman who wrote them, "Truth does not need anyone to believe in it to survive. It just needs someone to remember." James Whitfield said that. Dorothy Whitfield proved it. And tonight, in every corner of the country where someone sat alone with a secret they were afraid to tell, where someone cleaned someone else's floors and swallowed words that deserved to be spoken, where a child looked at the adults around them and wondered if the cruelty they witnessed was all the world had to offer, a different answer was forming. Quiet, stubborn, unbreakable. No, there's more. There's always more. You just have to stay long enough to find it. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you and you would like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And of course, do not forget to subscribe so you will not miss the next chapter we are preparing for you.